Okay. I can see it. I'm gonna lay it flat because I don't want to pull it out this way. So here's what I'll do. Oh, it's you guys. Holy crap. I forget how large these 5K iMacs are, and that is definitely space gray. Here you go. I present to you what'll be processing most of Tailosive from here on out. Oh, wow. Okay. That's it, everyone. In all of its glory. Today's video will be reviewing the iMac Pro after 20 months of use. Why 20 months specifically? Well, it's a good clean round number. We just hit it. I could wait for 24 months, but who knows? Maybe it will explode and stop working in the next 4 months. So I'd rather talk about the great that I'm experiencing right now and have been experiencing for the past 20 months. I unboxed this machine December 26th back in 2017, and it has been my primary editing rig ever since, and today I'll be telling you all about that experience. Let's begin. The great news I have to say about the iMac Pro after 20 months of use is that not much has really changed. If you were worried that maybe the iMac Pro wasn't going to age very well, or like many people thought when it first was released back at Worldwide Developers Conference in 2017, that it would be somehow a trap because the parts on the inside were not upgradable and you couldn't adapt it down the road. Well, here I am coming up on 2 years later, and I can confidently say that throughout all of the footage I've been editing daily, 4K at 60 videos for almost 18 months now, the iMac Pro is still handling all of them like a champ. In fact, while it may not be exciting to you that the iMac Pro is running just as great as it is today as it was 20 months ago, I think this is worth a video over simply because there is no other Apple product I think I have ever purchased which I have seen age this well. Of course, it's getting all the latest macOS upgrades and it's going to be getting them for years to come, but also any Mac I've had in the past has had some sign of wear and tear. My very first Mac I bought was a 2011 iMac. It was 21.5 inches and it was fast and speedy for what I needed at the time, but I did run into issues with the fan eventually, and the hard drive, of course being a hard drive and not a solid state, did start to show signs of aging very quickly after a year or two of using the Mac. We had to take it to an authorized repair shop and get the fan replaced, and the hard drive always slowed down and never really became better after a few years of use. With the MacBook Pro, which was my next daily Mac that I edited a lot of videos on, did a lot of live streaming on, you have to worry about a different number of things with a MacBook that you don't with a desktop, because a MacBook is very portable, it's very light and small, but the fans crank up really loud when you're editing high-res video like 4K at 60 video, especially back in the day, because I bought the first generation 2016 MacBook Pro. I'm sure it may be a different story now in today's genre of MacBook Pros, which it feels like there's a new one coming out every other day, which also makes it difficult to recommend because a lot of people ask me, when should I buy a MacBook Pro? But one came out a couple months ago and one's coming out in another few months. When am I supposed to buy a MacBook Pro? It's hard to say. Luckily, the iMac Pro in the past 20 months of use hasn't really gotten that kind of major refresh that's resulted in my current one becoming outdated, to the point that I personally think you could likely buy an iMac Pro today and it's still going to be one of the most up-to-date models you can possibly buy for many years to come. And of course, it's going to be getting lots of software updates well into the 2020s as well. The other issue you have to worry about when using a laptop, particularly when you're editing high-res video and frame rates, is using it on the go can result in more thermal throttling than using it plugged in connected to a USB-C charger, and it can use those turbo boost settings. So depending on how the MacBook feels that day or how hot it's running internally, you're going to get different performance. The great thing that puts the Pro in iMac Pro is that you don't have to worry about the time of day or even the heat of the room to worry about how it's going to be handling editing your video or how it's going to handle the fans running in the background. The iMac Pro should get an A+ if there was a class dedicated to keeping fans quiet and consistent. The CPUs run at a very consistent speed for long periods of time, exporting tons of videos on this thing. I believe I've exported multiple videos on the iMac Pro that are 4K at 60 and over 30 minutes, and I have done this routinely almost once a month or so. You'll get get these kind of huge videos, and iMac Pro export them using Final Cut doesn't even start to pick up the fans in the background. And the only times in the past where I noticed the fans getting loud in the background was when I used to use Adobe software, which was never optimized for Macs and never worked well for me. So thankfully, since then, I've switched completely to Final Cut Pro, and I never have to hear fans again, which is fantastic. Even if you do end up doing something rather power intensive that does get the fans running, it's typically not going to be absurdly loud like you're used to on a MacBook Pro. And plus, it's a desktop. Your keyboard and mouse are wireless, being used away from the iMac Pro, so you don't have to worry about your hands getting hot or your palms getting sweaty or your legs warming up, because the iMac Pro may be getting hot internally, but you don't have to touch that thing ever. I don't know if you guys know this, but I hate editing my own videos, and I have a passion to get it done as quick as possible while still retaining the basic amount of quality you expect from Tailosive. But the iMac Pro allows that experience to be as quick and as relaxing as possible, because when I start the day, I simply walk up to my iMac Pro, I press down on the space bar, and boom, it unlocks because my Apple Watch is attached to my arm, and it unlocks automatically. I don't have to worry about biometrics or typing in a password or pressing the power button to start it up. I've experienced no downsides in performance or in export times, even though I hardly ever shut down the iMac Pro all the way. I know a ton of you out there would recommend that, it's good for the computer to shut it down or at least let it restart from time to time. I'm completely aware of that, but in all my experience using the iMac Pro, I have left this thing on for days, and when I leave my office, I'll just put it to sleep, and the next day, I don't notice any kind of downside to the exporting speeds. Everything is still fast and quick, and when it comes to exporting my 4K at 60 videos, for the most part, it typically exports them 1 second per second. So a 10-minute video usually takes around 10 minutes to export, which for me is plenty fast, and I'm well aware that there are other iMac Pros out there with much bigger CPUs that can export things a little bit faster, but I don't need to spend all of that extra money just to shave off a couple of minutes on my export times. For those of you who may not know, my iMac Pro is basically the base model, the 8-core version, 32 gigs of RAM. I know, such a standard RAM option. The only thing I did upgrade, however, is the storage, because my videos take up a lot of space, and I edit all kinds of content for the Tailosive network on here, not just tech videos. So if you think I'm a power-hungry user editing 4K at 60 videos on my iMac Pro every single day, keep in mind that I do this with multiple channels every single day. So not only am I doing 4K at 60 on the iMac Pro on the daily, I'm also editing vlogs, which are shot at 4K at 60. I'm also editing movie reviews, which are shot at 4K at 60, some of which consist of multiple angles. I even do a lot of my unboxings now with 2 cameras, both recording 4K at 60 to CFast cards, which will instantly make the raw footage of my videos close to 300, 400 gigabytes, and never once have I experienced even a little bit of lag or choppiness when editing in Final Cut Pro. I got the base GPU as well, so don't bother asking about what kind of upgrades I should have got, because when the iMac Pro came out in 2017, my mind was blown. It was absolutely everything I wanted out of a Pro desktop class device, with the exception of maybe if they shrunk those bezels down and maybe give it a little bit more of a futuristic look. That'd be my only request for the iMac Pro, but again, it's a tool. It's a device made for getting work done, not made for really looking that good. Though I gotta say, as classic as a design it is, it still does look incredibly good. A space gray all-in-one with a very, very slim design and surprisingly a good amount of ports for an Apple product. You're still getting 4 USB 3.0 ports, 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, which even here we are in 2019 are still perfectly capable and really haven't been passed up by a non-existent Thunderbolt 4 yet. And even with the recently announced Mac Pro, the standard on that is still Thunderbolt 3 as well. I know you can get a lot more on there, but there's very few situations where I end up needing more than 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports in the first place. And especially if you compare the base model specs of the recently released Mac Pro to what you can now get with an iMac Pro, even though they haven't changed the specifications, Apple hasn't altered the prices of anything. The only tiny change Apple has brought to the iMac Pro in the past 20 months is that back earlier this year when they refreshed the iMacs, they gave the iMac Pro an extra beefier GPU option, as well as the option for 256 gigs of RAM. You can all make your Google Chrome jokes, go ahead. But yeah, that's the only change they've brought to the iMac Pro in regards to configurations. Hey, great, now you can spend $15,000 on a computer. Other than that though, the prices have stayed the same, the configurations are still there, and you can still get so much more for a computer if you end up going with the iMac Pro instead of the recently announced Mac Pro. That base model Mac Pro starts at $6,000, and that's just the computer part, and you're getting a okay GPU, you're getting the same amount of RAM. If you were to spec up an iMac Pro to be $6,000, you could double your RAM and still have 8 times the SSD storage that a Mac Pro does. Now, that's a whole different discussion. I'm well aware that the Mac Pro is made for people who like building servers and customizing their rigs down the road, but I have to encourage people to consider that you have to try to imagine situations down the road where for some reason your $6,000 iMac Pro or $5,000 if you go with the base model is not going to cut it anymore for what you need. Are you editing videos at 4K at 60 now and you feel like, well, the iMac Pro is going to be enough, but maybe down the road I'm going to switch to 8K at 60. Are you though? Think about laws of diminishing returns. Video resolutions get to a certain point where you're just wasting so much GPU and storage in your machine that it really doesn't make that much difference to the end viewer unless you're editing content that's going to be viewed on a 70-inch television consistently, because differences between 8K and 4K resolution pretty hard to notice unless you have very large screens to compare to. So the people who need the Mac Pro, they know why they need it, but I think the iMac Pro covers most of what higher end video editors are going to need in their daily lives. The other things I cannot compliment the iMac Pro enough for is the display. While it may not be an extreme dynamic range, at least the stand is included with this $5,000 machine, and also the speakers included with the iMac Pro are way too underrated. Not only do they have speakers coming out of the bottom, they also have some coming out the top that do face towards you when you're listening to music or watching videos. I didn't ever feel the need to go out and buy some kind of desktop class speakers to put next to my iMac Pro because for one, I'd rather have monitors there in the first place, and for two, the speakers on the iMac Pro are incredibly clear. They're pointed directly at you. It gets insanely loud, and I've been watching videos on it pretty much every day since the day I bought it back in 2017, and the speakers are way overkill. Anything over 50% volume just starts to get absurdly loud, and impressively not too much distortion once you turn it up all the way. Sound quality wise, I would almost compare it to the HomePod, but obviously HomePod is a little bit better in regards to hitting all the different levels of audio. It's way better at bass. iMac Pro is not as good as a HomePod, but I would say it's quite comparable. It gets really close. So as a video editor, that's the majority of what I've used my iMac Pro for in the past, though I have used it for lots of gaming streaming where the 1080p webcam is much appreciated. It actually supports 60 FPS like no other Mac does. I wish Apple could have made a monitor with a decent webcam like the iMac Pro does, but that's not happening. Speakers are excellent. I love that it's the dream vision of Steve Jobs of just being able to take a computer out of the box, plug it in, and just simply start working. Sure, there are people out there who want to be able to customize and open up their computers and swap out the individual parts, but frankly, I can't imagine a future where I'm going to end up upgrading my camera to something that is absurdly ahead of what I'm already recording at. 4K at 60, which personally, for YouTube, given most of you are watching this on your phone at 1080p, I think 4K at 60 is well into the overkill department. 8K, in my mind, is just being silly. So the iMac Pro, I think, could easily last me another 2 to 3 years of editing on a daily basis and probably still not even show the slightest smidge of wear and tear. It's not getting slower. It's going to be getting the latest version of Mac OS, no question, and my exporting times have not been slowing down. My read and write speeds are just as good as they used to be, and for a machine of this price point, it's funny to say that the iMac Pro, I think, almost has better longevity than the baseline Mac Pro. The only reason for you to really upgrade to that cheese grater design is if you're spending over $10,000 on your desktop, which not a ton of people are. The iMac Pro was already a very small audience, so the new Mac Pro's even smaller, but I'm very thankful that I bought the iMac Pro. In fact, I think I'm such a big fan of all-in-ones and not upgrading my machine down the road and just having one power cord, don't need a separate one for a monitor, don't need to have a giant box sitting underneath my desk that I have to pull off and dust over time. Just simply having one clean design. I think I'm more likely to keep using my iMac Pro until Apple hopefully refreshes it, maybe gives it some thinner bezels and a more futuristic design, and I'll upgrade to that all-in-one when it becomes available, because that's really my only complaint and my only criticism of the iMac Pro is the design is just a little bit dated, but as a tool, this is peak performance. This is as good as the all-in-one desktops can get. I can't think of any other PC all-in-one desktop that could rival the performance of the 8-core Xeon chips and the 5K display built in with the speakers you can get, with the webcam equipped, with Final Cut Pro's optimization of macOS, it's really no competition. The only thing the iMac Pro competes with are custom-built PCs, and of course the recently released MacBook Pros, which are getting up to speed with the base model iMac Pro, but you have to worry about thermal throttling, plus those keyboards, which are not terribly reliable, and depending on how hot that CPU gets, your performance is going to be adjusted heavily. Whereas iMac Pro, I'm not worried about that ever. It's always a consistent, enjoyable experience that's just focused on getting work done. For those asking about gaming performance, I do not game on my iMac Pro. I game on my Xbox because that's what it's built for. iMac Pro wasn't built for gaming, but what it is good for is video editing and making content for my entire network, and I cannot be happier with what I've gotten out of it. It is easily and clearly paid for itself. Back when it announced, I had to save my money every single month, putting $1,000 aside so that when the iMac Pro finally dropped, I was able to afford it. It was not a splurge buy. It was not something I would buy again in a heartbeat, because even the base model of this machine is able to last years and years and years and cover a vast array of video editing that probably most people don't even come close to. So that sums up my review after the 20 months of using the iMac Pro. I'm so glad I get to talk about it again, because we talk a lot about phones and AirPods and watches and foldable phones that you never get really a chance to kind of retrospect and look back at what you have currently and what you've been using for a long time. And I think the iMac Pro is by far the product that has aged the best out of anything I've ever reviewed. If you have more questions about my iMac Pro, feel free to tag me over on Twitter or join our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.